Hey guys, it's Brittany. So I'm back in a new location. A lot has changed, but we're not going to go into that today. Today we are going to talk about how you can choose the right breast pump for your needs. So before I get started, this will be a two-part video. This video is going to focus on what type of pumper you will be, and then I'll have another video on which pump you should choose based off of that, or some options. But before I get started, if you find value in this video at the end of it, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share to whoever new moms out there. So let's get started. So the first thing that I'll mention is that everyone is different. That goes without saying. So that's why I think one of the most important things that you can take into account when choosing a pump is your lifestyle. So in this video, I'm gonna go over 3 questions that you need to ask yourself. I'm gonna go over answers to those questions, and I'll also help guide you into figuring out what your answer will be. I'll kind of give you a multiple choice. For those of you who are new to pumping, who have never done it before, at the end of the video, I have you score and tally up all your answers. And then based on that, I will kind of guide you into what type of pumper you will be and what type of features also you should be looking at in a pump. So question number 1 is, how long do you plan on breastfeeding? This can be very difficult to accurately estimate, especially if you've never done this before. So one thing that I would think about is, what's the number that you have in your head? It might be based off of research or doctors or friends, or maybe something like, I'm gonna go back to work, or I'm gonna go on vacation, so I don't wanna be done by this time. Whatever that number is, write that number down, but then also take into effect what type of person you are and how you feel about breastfeeding. And by that, I mean, are you the type of person that when you set yourself or when you set your mind to something, you make sure it gets done, like through hell and high water? And is breastfeeding one of those things that you're so passionate about at this moment of time? That could change, of course, but I would say if you are super passionate about breastfeeding and you are the type of person that gets shit done no matter what, then I would stick close to whatever number that you have. If you have a goal of maybe like 12 months, but you kind of feel like, hey, I'm gonna try this out. If it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't, no pressure, which is completely fine. Then I might cut back those months a few. Breastfeeding is very hard, as I've mentioned. So just take into account, if the going gets tough, how are you gonna feel? Mental health is very important. So now we're gonna score that. If you said between 0 and 3 months, give yourself a score of 1. If you said between 3 to 6 months, give yourself a score of 2. If you said anywhere between 6 and 12 months, give yourself a score of 3. And lastly, if you said anything 12 months or beyond, 18 months, whatever, give yourself a score of 4. Question number 2 is, will you mostly pump or will you mostly be breastfeeding? Now again, this is something that is very difficult to estimate, especially if you've never done this before. Some people know ahead of time that they are going to be exclusive pumpers. Most people are a mix of both, but try and guesstimate which side you're heavier on. If you're going to be mostly nursing, mostly pumping, or about 50-50. So how do you begin to kind of think about how to estimate this? So one of the things to think about is, how do you guys plan on splitting up responsibilities? Some fathers would like to take part in the feeding. Sometimes you'll see partners where they split it up and they say, hey, since you can only breastfeed, I'll do diapers, bottles, I'll clean the equipment, whatever. And that's something good to talk about anyways ahead of time. So if your partner would like to, be able to feed the baby, then of course, you might be pumping more or even using a Haakaa and nursing, but you might be more on the pumping side. Another thing to take into consideration is, what does your village look like? Are you around a lot of family members, friends that will want to take the baby? I know if you're a new mother, you might not know what that's like. You might be a little anxious about leaving your little one. But if you're the type in your head, you're like, hey, I'm ready to get back to, my regular scheduled program, then the pumping might be something that you might end up doing more or just as often as your baby, so that when they're away with your loved ones or whatever, you have that supply there for them. So you might end up pumping, especially to keep up your supply while you're away. And then another thing to think about is, go back to question number 1. If you only plan on breastfeeding for a short amount of time, maybe this time is while you're on maternity leave, then you might end up nursing. You might be around your baby more often. So nursing might be more of a thing. But if you plan on nursing for a longer period of time, like let's say you were saying, hey, I'll breastfeed for a year, then chances are during that time, You're going to go back to work. You're going to want to travel. You're going to want to hang out with your friends. And so at that point in time, what does a day-to-day life look like? You might end up pumping throughout your day more just because you might be away from your baby more. How long is your maternity leave? Are you going back to work? Do you work in an office or do you work at home and you plan on keeping baby with you? Is the baby going to daycare? These are all things to think about when you're trying to figure out, hey, am I mostly going to be nursing or pumping? So here's how we're gonna score this. If you're going to be mostly nursing, give yourself a score of 1. If you're going to be mixed, which most people are, give yourself a score of 2. And if you're going to be mostly pumping, give yourself a score of 3. So most people will be 50-50, number 2, unless you've just already made the decision that you want to exclusively pump, and then you're a 3. And then the very last question number 3 that you need to ask yourself is, where will you be pumping? So this question really ties into the other 2 questions as well, but really think about what your life will look like over the span of time and where you plan on pumping. So by that, I mean, 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, what will a day-to-day look like for you? Do you go into work? So will you have to have a pump that you can take from your house to your work? Will you be sitting in an office? Do you work somewhere where you can take breaks? Do you work somewhere that you have a private place to pump? Or do you work somewhere, or you work in an industry like in a healthcare industry, you're a nurse, you're a doctor, where you're on the move, constantly on the go? These are things to consider. Do you travel a lot? I travel a lot for work, so that was another thing that I had to consider when choosing a right pump for me. So really think about where you will be when you're pumping, the different locations. Maybe you have another little one that you like to chase around, or maybe your life is just super busy and hectic. So here's how you're going to score this. Think of your life as a general whole, not extenuating circumstances or something out of the ordinary. And if for the most part, you'll have a stable location that's private, maybe it's your home, or when you go to work, you have one, a pump room at work, and you're really just pumping at home or at work, you don't really, travel or do a lot, then you're gonna give yourself a 1. So if you have a stable location that's private, give yourself a 1. If you are on the go, so you have a stable location, but maybe it requires a little bit of flexibility. Maybe instead of having your own office at work, maybe you might be bounced around from location to location to find somewhere to pump. Or maybe you have to go to different offices, or maybe you have a little one at home that you like to chase around. Then you're gonna give yourself a 2. So a 2 is for someone who is on the go. You still have like a private place to pump, but it's just more flexible. It's not always the same stable location. And then you're gonna give yourself a 3 if you are really, the best way I can describe it is high movement and little privacy. So if you travel a lot, if you're a nurse, so you're working, and there might be times where you have to go handle a patient, but you also need pump. So obviously you need to be able to pump and be in front of the patient. You need to be able to move. So if you are traveling a lot, you're on the go a lot, you need to be able to pump pretty much anywhere at any time in a highly public location, then you're gonna give yourself a score of 3. And again, like I mentioned, think of your life as a whole, not like, well, there might be a chance when this one thing happens. It's time to tally up your score. So if you tallied up your score and you have scored between 3 to 5 points, you are on the lower end, so you're low. That just means that you don't have a lot of dependency on a pump. So for you, I would recommend going with free options. So insurance guarantees you 1 pump free as of this video date. So I would stick with free or low cost options, just because you're not that dependent on a pump. So things like the Medela Pisa, the Spectra S2, things that are free with most insurances, and your deductible covers it, you don't have to come out of pocket. I would also suggest you just having 1 pump. If you score between a 6 to an 8, you're middle. So you're in the middle ground. For you, I would recommend maybe paying a little bit extra for upgrades. So a lot of times when you go through insurance to get your pumps, there might be pumps that are a little bit more expensive. For instance, the Spectra has 2 options, usually, and I hope I'm getting it right because I get them confused. The S2, the one that you have to stay plugged in, is completely free. And the S1 that you can kind of take with you on the go might be a $20, $30 upcharge. So for you, I would say you can go with the free options, of course, but at that point, it might be worth it to pay a little bit extra for the bells and whistles that most pumps have, and maybe spend a little bit of extra money. So if you score between a 9 to an 11, you are on the high end of the spectrum, which means that you are very dependent on a pump. So for you, you're going to use your pump a lot. So it makes sense to really take a deep dive and look at these features. It makes sense for you to pay for extra features because it's going to make your life so much easier. So at this point, I would definitely recommend paying for upgrades. I would also say that it wouldn't be crazy if you got a pump that costs a lot more out of pocket, or that insurance didn't even cover if it's something that fits your needs. If you also think it would be suitable to have 2 pumps at this level, I would say, okay, it might be worth it for you to have more than 1 pump as well. So I hope this video helped you in trying to figure out where you land on the pump spectrum, and gave you some things to think about as well. Like I mentioned in this video, I'm not gonna go over specific brand names. I know I mentioned a few, but in my next video, I for sure will be going over brand names. I'll be talking about which features and which pumps to pick based off of those features. So make sure you check out my other video. I'll be referencing this one as well. And I will talk to you guys next time. See ya.